Welcome. In this video I'm going to be replacing the front brakes and rotors in this 2006 Honda Odyssey. Now this may not be a comprehensive guide. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can, but this video is really just me sharing my personal experience. So the brakes I'm installing are these powerstop Evolution Plus pads, and I also have rotors. And these aren't the performance upgrade. These are made to be sort of a OEM equivalent pad and rotor. If you find this video helpful and you want to purchase one of these, I'll put a link to it in the description on Amazon, and if you use that link, it helps me out a little bit and doesn't cost you anything extra. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on the parking brake. So I'll press down on it. And I have confirmed that those work. It's not a bad idea to also chock the rear wheels. I'm in a garage and it would hit the garage door if it were to roll backwards. So I'm going to jack this up from the front, and after I get it jacked up, I'll show you where I jacked it and how I supported it with jack stands. It's just easier to show after the car is lifted. Okay, so I jacked it up on the tow hook in the front, and it's kind of hidden by the jack, but you can't miss it. It's a piece of metal with a hole in it. I jacked it up till the tires were just off the ground, and I put the jack stands under the jack points on either side. I then lowered the jack and made sure the tires were still off the ground. And then I jacked the jack up just a little bit, just till it has a tiny bit of pressure on that jack point. Not enough to actually even lift the vehicle, but just to kind of hold the jack in place. And that makes it ready to go when I want to put this down. But the vehicle is definitely supported by the jack stands and not the jack. Next, I'm going to take the lug nuts off. Now, I'll be using an impact. If you don't have an impact wrench, you'll want to loosen those before you jack the vehicle up. Now, if you've already jacked the vehicle up, you could have someone go in there and press on the brakes while you loosen them. And this looks to be 22 millimeters. When I'm removing lug nuts, I like to leave the bottom one on for last. That way the tire is held straight up and down while I'm taking the other ones out. Also, I should mention that I'm going to do one side then the other. If I get confused as to how anything goes back, I can always check the other side. Front brakes tend to not be super confusing, but if you're doing rear drum brakes, that's really good advice. So now I'll take the wheel off. Now normally I like to slide the wheel right under the car. That way if the jack or the jack stands failed, it keeps it from falling to the ground. But I have a limited amount of space working here, so I just set it off to the side. So the first thing I need to do is remove the caliper. Before I do that, I'm going to turn the wheels to the left to give me better access to the bolts. Okay, so next we're going to remove the caliper. Now you want to have a piece of wire or something to tie back the caliper. You want that ready before you take it off. So first I'm going to remove the brake line bracket, and that's a 12 millimeter. I'm using an impact, but you could use a wrench. I'll put the bolt back in here so I don't lose it. Now I want to loosen the caliper bolts. That's 14 millimeter. And on this side is 19 millimeter, so I need to hold that while I'm loosening it. I'm going to loosen the bottom, and then I'll come back to that one. Can probably unscrew these by hand at this point. Yep. So I'll set those aside, and I'm going to pull the caliper off. Now it's compressed, so I'm going to try to decompress it just a little bit. So I'm going to stick my screwdriver in here, and I'll pry out slowly. Let's see if that loosened it enough to get it off. Yep. So I'll run my wire through it. And I'm just hanging that off the spring. I'd probably hang it a little higher, but I do have a light over here. Actually, I am probably going to move that just a little bit, but you want to hang it out of the way. Okay, so that's a little better. So we still have the pads on here. I'll pull those off. So you can see they're pretty worn down, but they're pretty even. So that's a good sign. That being said, the inside one is worn quite a bit less than the outside one. So we'll want to make sure this is lubricated well when we put it back together, and I'll go over that in a minute. Now if we look here, the wear indicator is at the top, so I will put it back at the top. That being said, this could have been put in incorrectly previously, but I'm going to go with what it was before. Next I need to remove these two caliper bolts. Those are 19 millimeter. And those are on there pretty good. I'm going to put some penetrating oil on there. This is just some PB Blaster. I'm also going to get my long breaker bar. Okay, so I have a 24-inch breaker bar. I'll put that on there. I may need to move the camera a little bit. Okay, so I got those to break loose. Don't underestimate the power of leverage. I'll remove them the rest of the way with the impact. So now the caliper bracket should come off, and we can take the rotor off. Now that rotor may be stuck on there, so I'm just going to take this drilling hammer and I'll hit the face, and hopefully it'll break loose. Now there's a ton of rust coming down here. I'm going to put a little PV blaster in the middle there. I should point out that you may see some Phillips screws here. You can use an impact driver to pull those out. If they get stripped, you may need to drill them out. Those don't need to be there, so you don't have to put them back in. And whoever did a brake job on this previously did not leave them in. So that's actually helpful to us. Now, if we were saving this, I would not want to hit it with a hammer. So I'll set the rotor aside. And looking here, someone cut off those screws previously, although that is not super flush right there. So when I put the new rotor on, I'll want the holes to line up with these, since this is sitting above the surface just a little bit, I think. Maybe. I'll do it anyway, I'm not real sure. So next you want to clean all of this rust off here with a wire brush. You could use a wire brush on a drill or just a handheld wire brush. So here I have a small steel wire brush. I want to get this surface as clean as I can get it. Mostly so you don't have any rust sticking out that will keep the rotor from mating properly. So I want to clean up against this surface here. So next I want to tackle the caliper bracket. I've got these clips here. I want to remove them. So I'll just pry them off of here. And I'll want to clean these surfaces here. Make sure you do not damage these rubber boots. Now you can pull these out and lubricate them. These seem to slide pretty good right now, so I'm just going to leave them in, but I do want to get these surfaces clean. Now you can use something like a Scotch-Brite on a drill to clean these surfaces also. You just need to be very careful using these. Now the surface where the caliper bracket mates to the hub, it was very clean. It was on there very tight, so I think it was very flat against it, but I'm going to clean it real quick anyway. I'm also going to clean it on the car. Of course, I could use this to clean the hub too. So now I need to get the rotor out. So before I install this, I'm going to spray this with brake cleaner and wipe it down with a shop towel to get off any rust preventative or anything on here. Now I'm in an enclosed garage, so I'm actually going to do this outside. I'm not going to film this part, but you just spray it down, wipe it off. Now I do have gloves on, and these are clean gloves. I have not got them greasy or anything, but I am going to try and keep my fingers off this surface. Okay, so I have the rotor drawing off to the side. I'll get the pads out. Now you'll want to read the note on here. This talks about braking in your new pads. It talks about the procedure for doing that. It says perform 30 decelerations from 30 to 5 miles an hour, leaving 30 seconds in between brake applications for cooling. So the reason for this is so you distribute the friction material from the pad onto the rotor. So I imagine a lot of people skip this step when they do a brake job, but this is probably one of the more important steps. So here we have the new brackets. We're going to need 2 of these, and we have the ceramic pads. So I'll get this open. So we had the low brake indicator here on the top on the inside. So this is the orientation they will fit. Here we can see the old pads. And here are the clips that need to go on the caliper bracket. So these are all the same. Now before I install these, I want to put a light coating of grease on them. So I have this Prestone brake parts lubricant. I later found this packet of lubricant in the box that the brake components were packed in. So this would work just fine, or if you have a different brand you prefer, you can use it. Now I don't want to get this on any of the braking surfaces, so I just want to use a little amount of this. The reason I'm putting it on here is just to keep it from rusting. Okay, so I have those surfaces coated. I'll get these clips installed. So I'll place this on here and I'll press it into place. It's pretty straightforward. I'll do that on both sides. So now I want to put grease on these clips here. And I just want a little bit. And that lubrication will help give you even pad wear. I'm also going to put a little bit of grease on the pads themselves on those little ears. So now I need to get the rotor installed and then I'll put this back on the car. Now I don't want to put any grease on these lug nuts, but I'm going to put a very thin film of grease on the face of this hub. You could also put an anti-seize on there. Okay, so now I can install the rotor. Now the rotor's been cleaned. I've been putting grease on with my gloves. I've mostly been using this finger. I'm going to make sure not to touch any part of the braking surface with this finger, or really any of my other fingers. And if I do, I'll clean it off with brake cleaner. Now I want to line up where those Phillips screws would normally be with the holes in the rotor. So those are here and here. So there should be 3 holes on top and 2 on bottom. Just like that. And if I had those Phillips screws that would hold that up against there, I'm just going to put a lug nut on. Now I need to reinstall the caliper bracket. So I'm going to reinstall the 2 19mm bolts. So I'm going to run those in with the impact, but I'm not going to tighten them all the way down. So now I'm going to torque them to 101 foot-pounds. Now I'm ready to install the pads. There are a couple of different places I'm going to grease these. I'm going to grease these here and here, and then I'm going to put a thin film of grease on the back of the pad. Now I'll do the other side. Mating surfaces here too. I don't think I got enough on there. I do want to make sure I don't touch that rotor. So I do have a paper towel I'm wiping my finger on occasionally, so I don't have a bunch of grease hanging out here. So to put this on, I'm going to place it in at a diagonal and kind of snap it in place. Like so. Okay, now we need to reinstall the caliper. So I need to lower it here. Let's get a light back in here above. There we go. So I'm going to use my brush here to clean this off a little bit. I want to make sure that I don't hurt these rubber seals. There's some kind of rubber material on here. Okay, I think I got that cleaned pretty good. Then I'm going to clean the top surface here. I'm actually just going to use this. I think this works a little better than my wire brush. Make sure I shake that out. Now I need to compress this, so I'm going to be using this tool. It goes in here, and it ratchets and expands to compress the pistons back in. Now actually I'm going to go check the brake fluid reservoir and make sure it's not going to overfill too. The brake fluid reservoir was pretty low, which is to be expected when your brakes are low like this. So this doesn't have a lot of friction when it starts off, so I'll put my thumb here. And oftentimes you'll have to put the old brake pad in here to give it a little bit of padding. And this is still held up by the wire. Okay, we're starting to compress. So I'll just ratchet those in. Okay, I think they're in all the way. Nice thing about this is it compresses them fairly evenly. So I'll reverse it and I'll loosen it. Now to get this back in quickly, we can just spin this. And I really probably could have spun it to get it a little wider to start out too. So there's a little more stuff here. I'm going to brush that out of here. And now this is about ready to go back on, except for one more thing. I'm going to put a thin coating of grease on the pistons and the opposite side surfaces. Now this grease is specifically made to not deteriorate the rubber. So if it gets on those rubber seals, it shouldn't hurt it. So I'm going to take this wire off now. Of course, I lost my light. And I will compress the piston bolts a little bit, and I'm going to put this on. So I'm going to kind of hook it on the edge of those piston bolts and then fit it over the pads. Yeah, I may need to push those in. There we go. Okay, the caliper's on. I'll put the caliper bolts back in. Okay, so the torque on these is 37. And when we torque these, we need to have our 19 millimeter on that nut. Now we're going to put the brake hose hanger bolt back in. I don't have a torque on this, I'm just going to snug it down. And I need to remember to remove this wire. So I checked the brake reservoir. As I'm doing the second time, I will check it a couple times as I'm going through this to make sure it's not overflowing. It's not likely to on the first side. So let me get this straightened back out. So I pumped up the brakes, they felt firm, but I'll need to remove this lug nut, put the wheel back on. These are alloy wheels. I'll torque them to 94 foot-pounds, and then I'll go do the other side. After I'm done with that, I'm going to go through the procedure to bed the brakes, and I'll be good to go. Now since these are alloy wheels, I'm going to retorque the wheels after 100 miles or so. So that's installing the powerstop brakes on a 2006 Honda Odyssey. Same procedure is the same for a lot of Hondas and probably a lot of cars in general, but these brake rotors look very nice and the pads look nice too. I think they're going to be high quality and give me a good service life. So that's all I'm going to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you like this video, please click like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd appreciate if you could do that. And thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.